everybody. We're in Slow Walk 3. So happy to be here. We have a fascinating guest, Racheal Ward. And I'm Deanna Cochran. I'm an RN hospice nurse and doula trainer. Mostly what I'm interested in is everybody to know that you can have palliative care concurrently with cure-directed treatment. So from the moment of a serious diagnosis, you begin a palliative care treatment because we know things are going to go on. So you don't have to be dying to get it. That's my main message. Michael?
I love it.
I had to put a plug for that.
The clear, to the point message.
Yeah.
My name is Michael Hebb, and I'm a big fan of Deanna's, first and foremost, and was honored when she asked to get together and to invite people that inspire us, people that have moved us, people we wanted to get to know better, and bring you along for the ride. And that's what Slow Walk is about. It's a little bit of a longer format conversation than we're used to in the sped up world. About me, I am the founder of a project, an initiative called Death Over Dinner. Gets people to talk about their mortality and what they want at end of life and think about grief. And I wrote a book called Let's Have Dinner and Talk About Death. And I started a platform called EOL.community. And today we are here with Racheal Ward. Racheal is one of my new favorite humans on the planet. I got to hang out with her quite a bit recently, which makes every day better. We get to hang together. And it was your birthday.
Yeah. Yesterday was my birthday. The Divine 33.
Divine 33.
Yeah. The Jesus year, as my friend Grief has told me. I am so many things, but first and foremost, I'm a storyteller. I believe in narrative. I believe in the power of narrative and the way it empowers us and each other to liberate one another from our circumstances, our experiences, and to share more, to be more open and vulnerable. Ways that I do that are the many. I am a seminarian. I am pursuing my MDiv, my Master of Divinity, my Master of Arts in Practical Theology with a focus in pastoral care. And what that all means is that I care a lot about what it means to be human and what it means to be in relationship with the divine creator, whoever that is for you. And I also am the co-founder of a collective, is what I think we're going to go for right now in this moment, called Bible Queery. And what we do is we cultivate facilitation one-on-one and in cohorts for queer people of faith, any faith, various intersections who are looking for a new way to work through and discuss and be open with trauma that they've experienced in religious environments. And that incorporates body, mind, and spirit conversation, not just biblical case. And when I say things like biblical case, which I may say in this conversation today, I'm talking about the biblical case for affirmation of sexuality and gender of LGBTQ plus people. And I also write on queerandfaith.com. So if you're interested in reading a lot of things about death and grief recently, and a lot of things about the intersection of sexuality, gender, or faith, then Queer and Faith is a place for you to come and read and learn more. And the last thing I'll say is I also have a podcast called How to Be Human, where we talk about belief and being in that space. So as you can tell, all of that encompasses narrative and storytelling, and that is what I love. So thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled.
Wow.
It's wonderful to spend time with you. I'll start with the questions, and let's give you a 2-in-1.
Okay.
And we're gonna go straight into the deep end of the pool, and spend most of our time there because we're all comfortable over there and talk about stuff that can be hard to talk about, but really I think transformative and meaningful for people that are listening. So I would love to know since a lot of folks that are listening live and people will be listening in the future when we distribute this out, a lot of the folks are people working in the end of life space. So curious, and we're going to really excavate your work in the end of life space and talk about living death and living death doulas and all of these incredible things. And I want to know more about the biblical case. So we're gonna do a little more work there too. But I want to know how, essentially, your Genesis story, since we're using biblical terms, but I talk about people's Genesis story in the end of life space often. There's usually some great transformative thing that happened in our life, a loss or a huge aha moment, where we're then drawn to this work, and it's just what we have to do. So talk to us a little bit about that, but also maybe spend some time telling us about what it was like growing up, one, your faith, how you were drawn to Christianity and to being a public theologian. And then, to some extent, and I know we'll go into this further, but what that's meant as a queer person, and some of the challenges, maybe some of the inspirations, some of that for us.
Yes, that's more than a bite of avocado toast. I will share. I am from the bottom of the state of Georgia, is the way I like to explain it. Just so you can just go all the way down into the state somewhere. I'm from a place with very few traffic lights, and a lot of farming, a lot of peanuts, a lot of cotton, a lot of tomatoes, a small school system, a small town, where the home square of the town has your mainline congregations around each other in that square. Your Presbyterian church, your Southern Baptist church, your Methodist church, and we're in the deep South here, so the Episcopalian church is actually off of the square, off of the beaten path. So I was raised by a musician. My dad is a retired band director. My mom is a third grade school teacher. And my mom also has MS, so that's kind of the entry point, probably within my childhood, being interested about death earlier than perhaps some children are interested in death, just because that's an incurable disease at this point. And MS is multiple sclerosis. I'm so used to my academic world, I forget to spell out acronyms, so I'm gonna try really hard not to do that with anything here. And so, I mean, it's a very binary environment that I was raised in, where if a woman, graduates high school and if you stay there and you have a baby, cool, you've done it, you've done your work. And a man is supposed to provide in this way. So very patriarchal kind of raising in that regard. I was raised Southern Baptist. So I was raised to think that anything outside of behaving your parents and praying in a certain position or posture, wearing clothing that covered yourself was inherently wrong. And I was definitely raised to think that homosexuality, which is not a term that I ascribe to, was and is an abomination in their view and many people from my hometown view. So I was a Bible thumping, caring, meet you at the pole, see you at the pole, if anyone has ever heard of that, where you literally have prayers at the flagpole in front of your school, and Bible studies at school. I was involved in all of that. I was very indoctrinated into a certain fraction of Christianity that today I would tell you I'm horrified that I participated in any of that. But there are some useful pieces and fragments of the framework that I was raised in that I keep. And there are other parts that they needed to go somewhere, they needed to die. Sometimes we need to let certain things die so other things can be reborn or born in general. And I was just highly involved in church. I was always there. And if I wasn't there, I was within that friend group. And I was a band geek. So I continued with the musicianship of my father and college, I completely just, you go to college, you want to figure yourself out. So college was all about figuring out, oh, I'm like hella gay. I really, really am attracted to women, and also I'm not supposed to be. So living in turmoil for the 4 years that I was at school and a few years after that, as I'm kind of working through and detaching from like, here are the core system value that my family gave me, but here are the things that don't match up with the desires that I have that I really do feel are, in my language, I would say holy and sacred. So a lot of struggle in what it means to be Christian, and a lot of that has translated into, I don't even know what I believe about that word anymore. And yes, I know I'm in seminary and I'm like pursuing ordination and want to be a pastor, but I'll tell you right now, I don't know what it means to be Christian anymore, and that's okay. I do know what it means to be spiritual. And I do know that for me, prayer can look like taking a walk with my dog, or riding my bike, or journaling, or spending time in spaces like this feels spiritual to me. I love that there are candles lit behind you. Like that for me is the essence of my spirituality right now. So a lot of that had to crumble, and a lot of that had to fall, and a lot of angst and like unnecessary dying in my living, unnecessary severing of my person, to please family and the values that I had been raised in, and an unnecessary long amount of time in that, like just unnecessary wilderness walking for no reason when I could have been liberated much sooner. Which is why end of life care is so fascinating to me, and I think informative for the type of death and grief that queer folk experience, and the compassion that hospice nurse, palliative care, therapists that work just in grief, death doulas have in that space that pastors and counselors, Christian counselors, have no orientation to. And I don't know if they spend enough time in death and in grief, or listening to us to really understand the type of experiences. And actually, let me restate that. Never understand, but hold space to listen to those stories, and state, I'm here, and that sucks, instead of here are these scriptures, here are these ways that it's okay, and send you off into the wilderness again, where you're still dealing with all of the traumas that have happened from various entry points, whether it's family, church, or just society. We're not okay, we're not solidified here in the queer community. I know that I can sigh a breath of relief with who we have elected in office right now as a queer, non-binary trans person, but we're in no means in good standing in a brave space. We're still dying every day, physically, and we're still dying every day mentally and spiritually. And so that's kind of the fascination and the entry point and the intersection of what are people doing in the end of life sphere, and how can that inform the way that we stop dying and are living here as queer people, and the way that we potentially stop having such a binary, singular view conversation of how to care for us in the spiritual world. Yeah, that's my first like chewing on those 1-2s.
Wow, beautiful. You know what captured my attention when I got to learn about you, and I'm so excited you're here. We get to chitty chat for a while.
Yeah.
Is your living death life doula. I've been part of bringing that work as I kind of stumbled into it in 2005, and I've been a professional end of life doula since then. But I came out of my hospice nursing, right? And what I can share about that is that every new person that comes into hospice, every professional role, it's not that they learned of end of life in their study, like you said. They learn when they get here. When they get to hospice, I worked in hospice 15 years, overlapped my doula with hospice. So I worked hospice 2000 to 2015, And then I stumbled into doula because I had a home birth midwife experience, which was amazing. And when my mom died in 2005, I wanted to be like her and transform the experience of people who were really, it was awful when, what can happen. So, and I've been doing that for 15 years. So what I can say is that the people that come into hospice, they're not learning end of life from where they came from, or their education or their prior experience, because they come into hospice and there they learn. So they're learning in the field, on the ground, boots on ground, and it's the mentors in hospice that's teaching them everything and their life and their experience in hospice. Usually that's what everyone's saying. They're not getting that in school. So you're right about that. And so what I love about what you're talking about is your experience brought you to this living death life doula. And what I read that I was really fascinated with is, as a gay person, I say gay person, I don't know any, I'm old, I'm 59. Back in the day, he said gay, so I'm a gay person. I'm okay with saying that. Excuse me if I said something wrong. I always have to say that. Excuse me if I say. But anyway, as a person who's gay and who's experienced so much rejection and all that around it, and being so cautious, careful with anybody I served over these last 20 years, what I find, and I want to hear from you, what it sounds like you're talking about is coming out of who you really are authentically. You need to die to something, and a lot of times you're dying and you're being betrayed by your own family. Then you find your life. I mean, you grieve that. That's a big grief. And then you come back to life. So to me, you might be talking about death, physical death too, but I want to hear more about that.
No, you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I want to also circle back around. I want to answer you, but I also want to say queer people have this unique relationship with death. Marginalized people have this unique relationship with death because we're constantly thinking about it, or we're not, and we're avoiding that or running away from that. But specific, like trans community really know death in a way that other people don't. And so I think there also is empowerment to kind of harness that culture and that knowing that we have to kind of pull us through, and to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more uncomfortable to like name what those deaths are. And that is essentially what we're doing, what I'm doing with this living death doula model, is finding a way to make space for that. And so what I've identified and what we're talking about is research that I created for the American Academy of Religion's Death, Dying, and Beyond unit last year, which is so wild that it's been a year. Time is strange at this point. Time is always strange, but it's stranger right now amongst the COVID. But it's a cyclical nature of experience, and it's disassociation from whether it's our body, our mind, or our spirits. It's minimizing of ourselves, and that can be from family, church, making new friends, certain situations that trigger us. And it's persistent themes, things that we're telling ourselves about. We're not worthy enough, we're not good enough, things that we might have heard that have traumatized us. Is God going to still love me? I mean, these are all things that I have said to myself at one point and that I hear every single day in my direct messages, in my emails, in conversations in cohorts. Like, this is not like this is a wide swath of people having these reoccurring themes that are keeping them kind of locked. And the last cyclical phase of living death is spiritual rationing, which is basically, we've been told for so long that we can only have the crumbs, so that's what we believe. And so we ration ourselves to the bare bones of our spirituality and think, well, this is as good as it's going to get. And what kind of holds us in these phases is grief. Grief absolutely encapsulates these phases. And so we keep moving, we keep gearing and going and think that we're getting somewhere, but we're just right back. It's kind of like I'm going to try to drum up a visual. You know, when you put your laundry in, and sometimes it's kind of fascinating, you're a laundromat and you're watching like the big machine just go like this, and it might stop a little bit, but then it just keeps going. That's living death in its cyclical phases. You think it stopped, but it hasn't, because grief is just so thick and so caked on, that we don't even know like how to start the unraveling process. And that is why my research is based on saying, you know, the biblical case is wonderful. The development of that from so many different theologians, and the argument of that, which shouldn't be an argument. Humanity and human self should not be an argument, but society is messy. We're messy naturally as human beings. So the biblical case as itself has kind of been the one modality of care. The one offering is the number one thing that has caused the most trauma for queer people of faith is the biblical text itself. So when you're asking someone to use that as the sole source of a balm or a way to work through the grief that's, you know, keeping you, I mean, I'm making movements like this with my body. I'm like restricting myself, holding myself, keeping you like this. It's not enough, and it can be harmful. And when we're processing trauma, you know, we have our left and our right brain. So we have our felt sense where we answer things like, who are we? Where are we going? What are we doing? And we have the other side of our brain that is intellectually driven, where we're just trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And so when we're stuck in these cyclical phases, we're disembodied so much. We've been told so much as queer people that we can't feel our desires, we can't really say what we're really feeling, what we're thinking. God doesn't love us, all of these things. So our felt sense has been really detached, really disembodied. So something has to happen in order to dislodge that, to liberate that enough for a queer person to put those back together, to be re-embodied, to be rebirthed. You again hit the nail on the head, so that you can work through and with that. I don't personally believe at this moment, I'm always changing, I'm always growing, I'm always learning. I don't know if we get well. I don't know if we fully heal. I do know, and I do believe that we deserve to flourish. And I think we do that communally.
You deserve to what? I'm sorry.
That we deserve to flourish, that we deserve,
flourish.
Yeah, that we deserve that. And I don't think when we're flourishing that we're not necessarily in pain, that we're not necessarily suffering or having experiences of grief or having experiences of dying. I think the difference is that we are embodied, we're not disembodied, and we're able to walk through those experiences as whole as we can be. And so that is why I have created, and I'm still in creation, still in work, still in research, still in writing. I'm not done. This is an ongoing conversation. And working with this model to make space for that. And so I use narrative to do that. Through consent and through several conversations, I sat with a queer person to work through this model together. I am not a therapist. I did not do this as a counselor. So I want to name that right now. The agreement for us to work through the model together was that this person had to have a therapist in queue, that I would provide all of the narrative that we discovered together, all of the phases, all of the pinpoints, all everything. They would get the recording, the narrative, and that they would go to their therapist. And they are in therapy right now, and they are 100% living a much better life than they were before our conversation, because they were hung up on the biblical case isn't enough. I don't understand why I still hate myself. I don't understand why I'm not enough for God. And so we identified those areas. Where are you disassociating? Where are you minimizing? Where are your persistent themes? Where is the rationing taking place? And we went through the whole narrative from Genesis, from beginning of childhood to now. And we did it with no expectation. In church spaces, there's expectation. There's a binary expectation of what's going to happen. Well, if you do this, you're going to get saved. You know, if you act this way, like like in a prosperity type gospel. If you do all these good things, then you're going to get, this reward. That can't exist in this space. There has to be zero expectation. I can't promise you that when we get done here, you're going to be well, you're going to be healed. This isn't going to hurt anymore. We're going to explore together. I'm going to listen. No expectation. Space, so much space for inquiry and for questions. Howard Thurman is my go-to mystic Black theologian who's been doing mystic work, was doing mystic work before mystic work was cool in the theological realm. And he talks about that each person has within them a sound of the genuine, a voice that is of them, that isn't of society, isn't of where you came from. It is yours. It's the idiom that you were marked with. And he has this really beautiful, he's a really prolific and beautiful writer. And he talks about the sound of the genuine as like this ongoing life journey. And that you take several lifeboats, tiny little boats that can fall apart at any moment to reach this pinnacle island in the middle of nowhere and go up the island steps and go into this massive building. And there's an angel and you pull this fiery sword and then you have found the sound of the genuine. His point in this illustration is that it's hard work and that also we need support in that. And so that we should make space to listen and we should also ask searing questions. And be kind and compassionate in that space. And the third part of I call it a directive, which is to try to pay ode and homage to living death directives, which I like death directives in general, which I do talk about with queer people. I encourage queer people to have directives and to talk with folks about end of life often. And the third directive is to break from culture and to go into our queerness and to use our queerness and our understanding of death as empowerment to be more open and vulnerable about that. And so far, people who I have done that with have taken that narrative, started therapy, or have said, this is the most liberated experience I've ever had. This is the most encompassing understanding of what has happened to me. I couldn't get this from the biblical case or my pastor at the church I went to. And that's ultimately the aim, is to help people know that they deserve to flourish and that they can find re-embodiment. Because often when people are stuck in that, they are very, very, very disembodied. Yeah.
Let me ask you a couple things, because you said a lot.
I know.
And it was good.
You all said that this was a deep dive and you invited me. So.
I did, and we're happy. I want to make sure everybody gets what your model is. So you said the good stuff of it. So can surmise it just maybe in a sentence or two, your model. I want everybody to get it. What's your living doula model?
Just living death doula.
Yeah, the living death doula. Yeah. As in there's two explanations. There's what it is, and then there is the model of how to practice bearing witness to someone.
That's
all right.
Good. Yeah.
Cool. Want to make sure that I understand your question. Yeah, so I do want to name that I am working on how to deliver this in a way that can be summarized and also tangibly used via workshops. So know that's not ready yet too. So the best answer I can give you is that it's a 3-part movement. And the first one is setting really clear, open conversation that there is no expectation in this space. There is no expectation that we're going to get to what you want, that we're going to get to healing, that we're going to get to wellness in this moment. Zero expectation. We're showing up together. We're holding our vulnerability together. We're listening to each other. And the second movement of this model is space. So much wide space. A almost uncomfortable yet comfortable silence to allow a person to really sit in the narrative that they may be getting to share for the first time without interruption, without this is what you should do, this is what the Bible says, this is just a like an open, wide field for that person to really, really, really suss out the multiplicity of voices, to find, you know, what I was talking about with Howard Thurman, to find that genuine moment. Oh, this is like my genuine voice that wants to share this part. And the third part of the model is breaking from culture and embracing queerness in a deeper way. Because as I was mentioning earlier, queer people know death in a unique way that other people do not. And we can harness that to help us move through these living death narratives and to discover where they are lodged, stuck within us.
Talk to us a little bit about that. I like you said queer people experience death differently. I know you're speaking spiritually and emotionally, I'm sure, but explain to me what you mean by that.
Yeah. See, we're gonna sit in silence for a moment so I can collect my thoughts.
Good.
One of the individuals that I had joined me for a panel discussion in the summer, which was called Embracing Queer Death. Her name is Diane Reyna. I believe in saying people's names. And she has been a palliative hospice care nurse for over 25 years, and she entered her genesis for this specific type of care was during the AIDS epidemic. And she was sharing about how you would have these people who are dying from AIDS, who are also advocating for care, but also afraid to tell anyone within certain realms of what was going on because they might be told no. And so, like, how horrible, how horrible to be dying from this horrible disease. No one is paying attention. I mean, it was just, I highly advise people to read literature on HIV/AIDS and what happened to queer people. And to be turning inward to the queer community itself to figure out how to take care of itself, and also how to advocate for medicine, for laws to change, for care to change. And so I think that we have kind of created insular villages to take care of ourselves. And so that's one part. And I'm still thinking and kind of talking it aloud. It's just like, let's leave that there for a minute. And then for queer people and their like physical dying, if we die, like I talk a lot specifically about the trans community because the death rate is just much higher than other people within the queer community. If we die, still under the care of our parents, guess who doesn't get to get honored? Guess who doesn't get the burial they want? Guess who may not have their friends there? Guess who may not have their pronouns honored? Guess whose name may not be there? Guess what, their name may not be on the death certificate. This is a unique form of death, of physical death that queer people experience. And that community experiences too, because you might have this collective of community who knew this person is Mary, but their parents are not honoring Mary and they're calling Mary, you know, Tom. And so that just like the grief that overwhelms that community also creates, you know, more of suicidal ideation that will rampage that community, go through that community from an experience like that. So just death that like doesn't stop. Also death in like spiritual means, same thing. Like you may not be able to have a pastor that you want service your funeral because of, you know, their thoughts on sexuality or gender, or you have to like navigate family. So yeah, those tiers, like the different kind of experience that we have with physical death, the different kind of experience that we have communally when we lose someone, depending on how people are treating that, I think is what I mean. And also, like, I think we fear death in a unique way too. I can only speak to a queer experience, but like I know that Black and brown colleagues fear death in a unique way too. They know death in a unique way as well, that I think can inform and open us up for different kind of conversations. But we fear death. I think I fear death in a way where, if I die, when I die, let's change that. When I die, will my family like honor me, even though I have autonomy in my marriage? Like, will they honor me? And will I get my wishes fulfilled? Or, how will I think mine is really wrapped up in like a spiritual sense and a family sense. But for other people, there are people who just long for death too, who long to not be here because of the suffering. So I think that's kind of like all of the things that I'm talking about.
Can we do a little bit deeper dive on that? Is that okay? Around being honored,
Yeah.
being erased, being honored. There's another leader, Joelle Simone Anthony. We had a session a few months back on, I guess, issues specific to gay, lesbian, transgender, lesbians, everybody. And it was fascinating, but actually when we got down to the solution, it was quite small when we got there. Not that it was not important or that it was simple, but it seems like it all got summed up in what you just said about being erased and having advocates there. I mean, I was just so moved to tears, because I know the last 20 years of my life, I haven't been able to share with my family. They get all together, they have a bunch of people, all their friends get to show up, they talk about their lives. I cannot talk about my whole life unless I planted a tree, bought a new house,
or the weather,
the garden. So I get what you're saying, and for us, it makes more. It's more important and imperative to have your advance directives, even at 30 years old, even at 20 years old, because that won't happen if somebody is your spokesperson. Then you get to have what you want. So for us, it's even more important. For the average Joe, you need to do it while you're happy and healthy. Just bite it and do it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So when I had the panel discussion in the summer, that was the motive, was to have, I had a therapist, a queer therapist, a queer hospice nurse, and a queer pastor who's also trained as an end-of-life doula, which is an incredibly interesting intersection. And we all had a conversation about the uniqueness of queer death and grief and what we've experienced in our childhood up into where we are now in our various careers. But the whole premise was to open the space to talk about that and to talk about death and make room and answer questions, but to also walk everyone through in the room how to put together an advance directive, where they could go, things like that. And there was 50 people in the room of all ages who literally had said, I didn't know. I didn't know. And this is a gift. You can take the autonomy for at least your body back, and in your spirit back. You may not be able to take you. We're gonna always have to deal with family. I'm always gonna have to deal with like my family not honoring, that I'm married, that I have a full-fledged adult life going here. Pretty good one, I think. But they are never going to say, I'm proud of you, or I see your wife, her name. Like, they're not going to do that in conversation. And the separation that we have to live in that space is so painful, and it will be painful. But we can take back the autonomy on our bodies, on the way that we get to die. Yeah.
Will you talk about living in the empowerment? Michael, I'm being a question hog. You want to come in? Come on, I'm sorry.
Are you kidding? This is extraordinary to watch the two of you connect and go deeper around this. I'll hold my questions till there's space.
Okay. I trust you. I know you will. Okay, so we need to go in a little bit on gosh, you were saying something good that gosh, I can't remember. I was so worried about Mike. One of my problems, I'm a people pleaser. So I was so worried about Michael not asking. I was hogging the question. But okay, let me get back to. Oh, I know. So this is the thing. When people will say, "Oh, you have so much courage. You lived through cancer. You lived through the death of whoever." No, I just didn't die. I just didn't die. I had no choice, seriously, to go through that. I didn't die. Okay, so given that, what I love what you're talking about is, especially your stage one, no expectations. That's a doula thing, Rachel. That's like talking to people when we're, in my training, that's like, I have a long, extensive, comprehensive training, and I'm telling you, most of it is weaving that concept into it, because that's the most important part of being a companion and what you're talking about. I'm not at this, I'm not at that, I'm not at this, who am I, and all of that. And it's about, who cares? Your companion. So to me, I see you as a companion. One day you'll have all these credentials, awesome. But what's most important is the companioning you're doing right now, and the seeing, the witnessing. The people that are marginalized are not seen. And if they're seen for a minute, then there's like, okay, stop. You're just like really getting too much. That's what people say is like, okay, we made your point. Quit pushing it in our face, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is. But will you talk a little bit more about, because I highlight Stephen Jenkinson for that too, because he talks about engaging with our grief, having a relationship. Doesn't mean I'm ever going to get over it. I'm ever going to get through it. I'm ever going to heal. However, my interpretation of a lot of what he says and shares, some of it, is that if I have a relationship with my grief, then I'm engaging with it. I'm learning how to live with it. And then I don't get compartmentalized. My soul doesn't fragment. I get to be deeply with you. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. You've made me think about a thing, which is great. And also I'm like, oh yeah, this is like one more thing I need to put in here. Which is not, oh man, like in a negative way, but like there's just so much here. There's so much in the paper that I wrote. There's so much. So let's just acknowledge there's so much. So no expectation is really rooted in the fact that I believe, and I wrote it down, so I will say this sentence right, or usefully. Christian space is binary, just is, so binary. And we're not just talking about pronouns. We're talking about it is this or it is that, period, binary. But it doesn't accept, or depending on, I know we're going to get like some theological terms, depending on like doctrine and like what mainline church you're in, doesn't accept like learn how to live with it. That's not there. So no expectation doesn't really exist in the way that we do pastoral care, the way that we're taught in divinity school, in seminary. Definitely in the relationships that I've had with non-affirming pastors, definitely, that's not there. There's just this choice, this like mechanism of choice. You either get over it or don't bring it here. Or, grief is only allowed in this certain time frame. Like a person dies, you go to the funeral home, you have the service, you hear the sermon, the homily, whatever takes place. You leave the funeral home, and that's it. like grief after that is just weird, awkward. Why are you doing that? It's over. We've put the person in the ground, which the person is more than a person. Like that's a spiritual being, that becomes a part of the earth. Like we can think about that person every day for the rest of our lives. And we can honor that person in different ways too. But I just don't think that in Christian space, that we make space for, a learn how to live, learn how to live with it. Like that's, yeah.
It's almost like a get over it, right? It's almost
Yeah.
it's called spiritual bypassing. It's almost like if you have faith, you're going to go here, and then there's from here to there didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No, that's not putting words in my mouth. That's exactly what I'm saying. There are just so many tangible thoughts to that, so I'm having to censor down. And I don't think I've actually articulated or thought about that before until this moment. So this is a really great conversation to be having. Christian spaces, in my experience, do not care about grief being more than a moment. That God, Jesus should be enough, that is your salvation and your uplift, and that you can't experience lows. So there's even in Christian spaces and spiritual spaces and that there's an expectation of how you're supposed to grieve. There's an expectation of how you're supposed to feel, which is really how you're supposed to think. It's not how you feel, because if it was how you feel, then there'd be no expectation. You can grieve as long as you want. You can come to the Blue service on December every year and talk about, I'm going to name a person, talk about Sam, who was a super influential person in my journalism career, who lived across the street from me, who died 5 years ago from liver cancer. And I still miss him. But if I brought that into some certain spaces, it would be like, why? Why are you still grieving? Why are you upset? So that's why no expectation has to be first. It has to be first. To try to rattle the core a little bit and be like, oh wait, I can do that. I can just sit in this. I don't have to expect that by the end of our conversation, I need to be at some destination or point. And Christianity is kind of set up like that. It's kind of set up like a roadmap. Which is why I said at the beginning, I don't really know how I feel about Christianity or calling myself a Christian, which may feel really interesting, considering that I've all told you that
so
I
are
want to
you
be
in
a
a traditional a traditional seminary? What's your seminary program? And I love that you are in this journey with what you're being pushed to your limits, is what you're being pushed to, your boundaries, your limits, your where you believe and what you're going to believe, your expansion. That's what it feels like to you. You're really being in this wonderful place. So does the seminary support that? Are they wanting you to be quiet about it?
No, the faculty, let's break that out in 2 seconds. A seminary is an institution. An institution has a certain set of thinking ability and values and ways that they like to go. So I would say institutionally, no one's going to try to quiet me down, but no one is also going to raise me up in the work that I do. It's me who emails my president and emails the dean to tell them what I'm doing. I don't fit the mold of the mainstream messenger. And I feel quite brave and bold to say that here. I'll say that anywhere. But the faculty of where I go, they are incredible. And they are the ones sowing seeds. And we are the ones that get to choose. Are we going to go plant the seed, or are we going to just throw it down and keep going? Or are we going to actually tend to the garden, which is a very spiritual analogy. But I love garden analogies. I'll do those all day. But I feel supported in that capacity, which is really all that matters to me. What matters to me is companionship. What matters to me is being human with one another, in our messiness, in our lows and our highs, in our mids. Yeah. And I think that my queerness is what allows that. I think being queer have like a foot forward than some other people because I've had to work really hard to still be here.
Yeah, well, there is an authenticity to your path that you're on and how you embody that. That it's not surprising, even though it might be surprising that the professors in the seminary would be responsive. It's also not surprising because you really are embodying it. I don't know what about your soul is drawn to these struggles, but so many people are already benefiting and are going to benefit. I mean, Sue in the comments here wants you to start a new church, a new movement of Christians.
I can tell you that I think those things are happening today. Like churches, that's the like paradox of me. I still believe in church. I still believe in church, but I believe in the people of the church. It's kind of the difference. Where the people are is where the church is, and we are responsible for holding one another accountable and how we service and love the people. So, yeah.
You know, when you were you're talking about church, something you said when you were talking about our experience in probably other religions as well, but I have experience with the Christian church. That's all I have, is needing to just step into faith to kind of not take it so hard, whatever it is. But I can say that I have gone with my dad to non-denominational churches for 40 years. That's where he goes. And I go with him every Sunday that I'm with him. I don't live with him, but when my grandmother was dying and we were taking care of her, that was a year. He's in ill health, so we've been caregiving off and on, in and out, for about 8-9 years, and there's all these different periods in between. And when you said something, I thought I've never thought before. I cry every time I go, and his religious faith isn't exactly mine, but I know part of it is the spirit, because I can be anywhere spirit is, and I'm affected anywhere. I don't care whose church it is. But I wonder if that's how people are processing their feelings. Everybody's crying during worship. We're singing, we're being moved, the tears are coming, it's safe. And I'm wondering if that's how we're processing, even though we're not allowed to, we have to have faith in the answer, like you said. I wonder, what do you think about that? Have you been in those churches where they're actually crying, they're emoting almost during the whole of worship?
Yeah, I was raised really evangelical too. So non-denominational churches scare me. But that may not necessarily be like, that's just me being honest. They scare me. They can get away with so much more and hide so much more than other like mainline churches. When I say mainline, I'm talking Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopal, like UCC, those type of mainline.
They're more conservative. They're not crying every.
Well, I think it also depends on the environment and the way that the tone is said. If there's like more tears or not. I was in an Anglican light evangelical church for like 5 years. And that's actually the church that I realized, oh, I like want to be in ministry. And so I had to leave that church because that church was not going to like walk discernment and do anything with me because they're not affirming. But people cried there all the time, or would raise their hands, evoke emotion, and it was beautiful. And I actually, you're causing me to have a new thought. I want to like rope to your thoughts somehow. After services in that church, there would be people I'd have conversations with, people I'd be becoming friends with in small group. I was very open about being queer, and and they were super loving, but they had to stop at a certain point. And like I really wonder if there was a way to like harness the like vulnerability that happens in like a worship service. Like, would they stop, or would they like be have enough like faith to move forward in conversation with me and stop letting all the other voices in the world tell them what to do. Like what if we allowed emotion not just in a worship set, but like the whole time? I will say that the first time I was with a group of 24 queer people that I did a leadership development cohort with 2 years ago. And it was the first time I'd been in a church setting with just queer people. And I lost my ever-loving, like all of it. I lost myself. I cried the whole time I had to sit down. It was so prolifically beautiful to see queer people in one room worshiping. And we had like a worship night where a lot of us played music and there was a worship band and we were invited the community to come in, and you just watch the room fill with more queer people or like allies. And then there's this massive like worship and sermon. And I was like, oh, this is the church, and this is like what I want to be a part of. Like I want to be a part of this happening more. So yeah, I don't know. That was a tangent, but I liked your thought. I liked your new thought.
You know, I love you. I do. You're amazing. I can say too, I want you to have your church because when COVID's ending, I'll come. Well, you said something. So to me, what I find so powerful right now is that to me, Christianity, when it began, was not a faith of marginalized people as much as it was trying to convert them. So they took their whatever practices and tried to make it Christian somehow. And what I find super powerful, there's been so much damage done, right, from every religion, and you still want to be Christian. To me, I could start crying right now. It's the power of God, of what creator, of this unknown, of the mystery, and you are still so driven and want to bring healing or understanding or open up the thing of it. I love that about what you're doing.
Thank you. I think that, well, everybody has like their individual journeys in that. I also want to say that I don't think that we have to have hard stories in order to tell our stories. I think a lot of marginalized folks have to tell sad stories in order for them to be believed, or for you to be like, oh, that's it. That's why you have this like courage, empowerment. Like when you mentioned that earlier, oh, that's so much courage for you to have like gone through these things. Like I have had some terrible, like effed up things happen to me in my lifetime, but I don't have to tell all of that to tell you why I'm so passionate about this work, or about the church, or about people, or about divine or creator, or whoever that is in each day that I move through. And so I just want to name that right now as the pastoral authority in me, that you don't have to tell your sad story for you to tell your story and to tell it authentically. You don't have to lead with that. It doesn't give you like, you had a sad story, so now you have the right to say a thing. You should always be able to say a thing, share a thing. But I just want to be human. And I just want to be in relationship with God. And I just want to see us all live well. And I want to see Jubilee be a real thing. And I believe in Genesis. And I believe in all of everything that is in the biblical canon. But I really believe in Genesis, and I really believe that we overlook it a lot because it tells us everything we need to know. And then the rest of the canon is just trying to get back to the Genesis. So again, very Howard Thurman, but every day, like there's a practice that Howard Thurman writes about centering down and asking yourself a series of questions of, who you want to be, where you are. It's very felt sense, right? Who you want to be, where you are, what you're feeling, and what difference you want to make, and how you're going to take care of yourself. And my centering down is always in, how am I living out Genesis, and how am I taking care of myself, and how are we going to do that together? Because this is not an I thing. It's never an I thing. It's a communal thing. And death is a communal thing. And we should talk about death in a communal way. And we should talk about it before we're dying. Yeah.
Amen.
Michael, do you want to ask questions from this chat? Is Kaylee going to ask those, or you, or do you?
Yeah, I can. Well, and to let people know that are listening that they can use the Q&A, or they can put a question in the chat. We've seen a couple that I'll offer up, but just to recap, and Rachel, let me know if I've got this right, because I think we've done a lot of great.
I love this. This is fun for me.
And that's exactly what we designed it as. So we're just going to walk down a bunch of different rows, and we're going to turn when we hear a bird over here, or we see something beautiful. But to recap, the living death doula, or the living death directive, is from what I understand, it started as an inspiration and a provocation that responds to the fact that you feel like that there is a type of ongoing death that queer people are living that has them being traumatized, that can be re-traumatized when a real death experience happens, doesn't give them access to their grief. And so you get inspired, decide to create a model that could start to reinvigorate, to give people an embodied sense, to go back to that place where they broke off from their authentic self and reclaim it, right? What would that model look like? And saying, being queer, there's at least one massive death, and there's tons of other deaths that you've experienced. Let's walk back along that path. Let's reinvigorate you. What would that model look like? And then you tried it out. You worked with a therapist. You worked with a patient, or a person, a human, and you found that it did enliven them. And now it's a living, breathing model that you're inquiring about, still building around. You have people like the American Academy of Religion asking you to present about it, which is no small thing. It's how we got to meet.
It's true. Yeah. I'm quite thankful for that no small thing.
Yeah. And so is that a fair recap before I go into a couple,
Yeah, that's a beautiful recap. Thank you for offering it.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I've noticed, or just came to me, talk about new thoughts. I was hearing us talk about the compartmentalization of grief, the Christian tendency, also our cultural tendency to say grief has a timestamp. It has a period. There's a way that you go through it. I think stage theory, I think it's been misunderstood and misapplied, has done a lot of work, a lot of kind of negative work codifying this idea as well, that grief is a limited experience and then you get over it. And it reminded, I mean, one, I want you to talk a little bit about a continuing bonds theory, or just this notion that instead of, remembering the dead, like we do, the idea of taking care of the dead, which is what we're being instructed to do from thousands of years of wisdom tradition, right? Like that the dead are always going to be part of our lives. So let's take care of them in this model. So maybe some commenting on that. There is a question about Buddhism in here, and do we feel like you're maybe a bit of a Buddhist? That, and then the other, it came to mind to me, the AA model, right? So here's a model where people, regardless of if they were were dealing with an addiction just during a period of their lives, they identify as an addict and find it in a community to identify as such, and to have that reified, not as a negative thing, but just as a thing, without an expectation. And it's not a time stamp. You're only an addict for that. You're just like, it's known in that model as a very curative model. There's things that are wrong with AA for sure. But I just think that, like, the notion that I'm a griever, right? Like the reifying the thing that it's okay. We don't create that kind of space for it in the same way. and we don't think about the type of trauma that grief can impact. So there's a few a few things to chat about.
Wow.
Take it wherever you want.
I don't even fully know if I remember everything you just said because I was so like deeply listening that I think I got lost in like the whirl of all the things that you were rolling out to me. If you could just like pick one thing, I can probably pull the rest of the threads.
Yeah, do you think it would be valuable? It sounds like you do, but to have a more of a continuing bonds relationship to the death that is when you realize you're queer, like that instead of like I'm out, but like let me go back and talk about that death is something that's always going to define my life, and let me take care of that dead person, not just or that death that happened. Let me take care of that event, those experiences, in the way that we're learning from continuing bonds theory as being more healthy. And maybe I'm way off base, and you're like, you get to do.
No, I'm gonna ask you like a dialing question to see if I'm understanding
Yeah.
it correctly. Are you talking about when queer people come out? Or am I hearing this wrong?
No, I'm just.
Because that is also like very grief filled and ignored, just as a tangential thing. Like when queer people come out, it's like overly celebrated, rightfully so, but there also is a lot of grief that comes with coming out, and a lack of honoring or open space to talk about, and the ongoing grief, like the family dynamics that we were talking about, like that is the ongoing grief that stems and comes from, well, you decided to come out and you decided to be your authentic self. So there is like that part. So I didn't know if I was hearing that correctly. If you're talking about specifically when we lose a loved one, a friend, a companion, and creating a continued bond of like honoring and care and coming back to, then like, yeah, I would say that is a thing that I agree with. The only way I know how to answer that is to tell a story. But you should know that by now, right? We've been here for a minute. When my friend Sam passed away, I tried to think about like all the stuff he had taught me. He was very pivotal in like writing, and I was a print journalist for like 7 years. I love newspapers, still love newspapers. And the word courage is like the thing I thought about. And he loves like, and I when I talk about people, I talk about people as if they are here. I think they are here. So I say he loves robins, like loves all birds, but like the backyard that they had, he like set up all of these different like bird displays. And so like after he passed away, I saw like an abnormal amount of robins. And I was just like, oh, that's so awesome. Like, and now whenever I see robins, like, you know, I'll say hi Sam, either out loud or in my mind. Like that's like the bond that I have. And I also like got a tattoo on my ribs, which I highly encourage. No one should do that. It's so bad. This is my second tattoo. I know I have a sleeve, but at the time I only had like this tiny little anchor on my hand. And I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna get courage on my ribs. But I did, and I have that, and like some, you know, like sometimes like I'll touch the side of my ribs, and like that's like my way of like continuing to like remember and be in conversation. And my grandmother passed away in September. So this is recent. And I am trying to figure out we're always trying to figure out tangible ways, right? Something to do that I can have tattoo wise of her or with her that I can carry. But she's like a storyteller, so I'm so much from her. But I have pictures of her, and like I talk about her, and I'm finding ways to like talk about her and honor like when I'm not okay in that. So I think that in some way I am practicing that, if that's like a way of coming back to that question. Yeah.
Well, and I'll clarify, but also say to if people do have questions and put in Q&A, we can bring you. Kaylee is here, and she can actually bring your face and your voice up onto us. So
Oh, I love faces and voices.
yeah, so go ahead and put your question in the Q&A, which is should be down on the bar, and more or less what you want to ask, and then we'll bring you your embodied self.
Come as you are.
So what I was circling around, and let me get more clear, is in your model there's these 3 items, and I'm wondering if something around honoring the death might find its way in, and so if we do subscribe to a continuing bonds model, like you said, like the rock, for human physical death, right? And that we know, like having an altar for someone, traditionally, and or going back to the grave, that's actually not a morbid thing. That's a healthy way of being in relationship.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a living death, um, directive and model, right? So there is a death. And perhaps there is an element of a continuing bonds with that death and honoring of that death.
Okay. All right. We've made it. I don't regret any of the things I offered before, but we've made it. Yeah. It's not finished. And so I can 100% see some part of that becoming. I can also see how a part of that honoring, especially with what I did in conversation with this person who's a part of my paper, I think a part of that honoring was giving them that narrative. I had the whole conversation transcribed for them, and memorializing that in the video and audio, so that if they wanted to go back to remember, where was that point where I was minimizing? What was that? How did that feel when I told it? They could go back to that, read it, or listen to it, or bring it to the therapist to honor that happened and to remember that happened. So in this moment, I'm thinking, oh, I guess I'm kind of already making my way to that. But yeah, that's something. That's a pen to put down and see where that goes.
Yeah, and it's just, these are just reflections. It reminds me a little bit of the extraordinary work that Lynette Johnson and Soul Illumination does. I don't know if you know about this organization, or Deanna, if you know about Soul Illumination. So Lynette started taking took pictures of her sister's child who died about a week after she was born. And they decided, and her sister asked her to come in, Lynette's a photographer, and to take a picture of her child, and to dress her beautifully. And the nurses were like aghast, like, you can't, this is not allowed. And they were like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah,
and created beautiful pictures, and that became so meaningful to her sister that Lynette started doing that for other families. And now there's 60 photographers in Seattle who for free go and photograph children, either in their last stages or after they've died, and create these gorgeous books for people. And so that they don't have to jettison off that incredibly painful part of themselves. And I'm not saying that this is a direct relationship. This is just an...
Yeah.
I'm not going to draw any parallels here.
No, I think it's important. I think once a person has named or found or discovered where these living death narratives are harbored, we can't just say, check mark, we did it, and move on. I think there's a certain part of a relationship that gets developed to these things. I like to talk about it as we're at the dinner table, and grief sits here, and my imposter syndrome sits here, and all the other things, and they kind of rotate sometimes. I kind of think that living death narratives sit at the table too, or we tell them to go sit at the kitty table sometimes. It's just deciding, knowing is half of the journey. Coming into the wisdom is half of the journey. What are you going to do with the wisdom, and how are you going to continue to be in conversation with it? Because it's not an answer.
As a death doula, as an end of life doula, a professional for many years, it's important for us to know and talk to people very specifically. And I'm just so grateful that you've come forward to talk to us and given us some things. And I hope people, because it's so easy to get in on a conversation like this and say, oh, you're trying to separate everybody. Why are their needs any more important than somebody else's? They're not. We're just talking to you right now. We want to hear, because as a person who's walking with everyone through dying that comes in my world, I want to know, it's never like, I'm Hispanic. Do I represent every Hispanic country and culture? No. But it's important to talk to people with, just to see, like, you opened my mind. I'm gay, and you even opened my mind more. I work with an end of life for 20 years with many gay people. You opened my mind more. And I love these conversations, Mike. I'm so glad we're doing this. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you. That means so much, truly. Yeah. We can learn from each other. It's not about isolation, you know.
We're separating people out. It's about,
this is community. This is communal. To listen. Sometimes we sit back and we listen, and then sometimes we stand up and we talk. So it's a divine dance. That's all we're doing.
Now, I alluded to it a little bit, but I'd love to hear your reflections on it. What do you think it is in you that is drawn to these exquisite struggles?
exquisite struggles, yes.
I mean, you live in the South. That's a hard place to be queer. You reside in the church. That's a hard place to be queer. You decide that you want to focus on end of life and grief. Another pretty challenging. You've taken Adaptive Valley on top of to talk about wilderness. So, and it's like, thank God there are people like you. And I mean, really, thank God, not in the everyday way. But what do you think what do you think that is in you that is not just drawn, but so authentically drawn?
Remember how I said we don't have to tell hard stories to tell the whole thing? So I'm not going to tell the whole hard story. I'm going to say it bluntly, simply, but it has complexity to it. I could not be here in several different ways in several different moments of my life, and I am. And I am here for people who have loved me well, and because I think God has saved my life many times, just truly. And I think that because I am still here, that I have gifts to offer. And one of those gifts within me, which sometimes I feel is like a curse and a blessing, and that's fine. We live in that paradox of what is this, is empathy and room to listen and tell stories well, and to be. And I thrive in that environment. And I care. Like, I know that sounds so like cheesy, but like, I care. I deeply care about my queer community, and I care about everyone in this room. I care about our ability to discover who we are, and to know that that is always a development, and that we get to be the sojourners of that. And to Michael's point, I love the wilderness. I think it's the holiest torn veil place we can be. And maybe this is just like my way of being as close as I can to God, is being in these places. But yeah. Final answer.
that was everything that I could ever ask for.
You know what y'all are, this, where y'all just came from right now, this talk, it makes me think back about something someone told me a long time ago, really, really wise person. And I was in a lot of pain at that time. And she said, and I didn't know this about myself. She said, "You have a huge spirit." And I thought she was a real mousy woman, first of all. And I'm like, what is she going to tell me? Nothing, right? I can't even believe I'm talking to her. Why am I talking to her? And she said that to me, and she got my attention because I didn't know that. I'm thinking, really, I do? And when she said was, "You have a huge spirit. So if you want to stay on this plane, you need to address this and support this. It's beautiful." And for the first time, I saw that, oh, that's where I need to get filled up so that this plane isn't so painful. And when something you said reminded me of that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm really committed to being in the academy, which is really just people who write the books and tell you that you have to learn a certain way. Being a voice there, and being in the church, and then being in the public space, like just a movement through those three little tiers. Like I think that I have gifts to offer, and I also feel like I want to take people there with me. It's not about just me. Like I want people to have those opportunities and spaces for themselves too. Yeah. And I'm a 4 on the Enneagram scale, so that explains anything.
I've been putting a few little things in the chat. One is a pull from your beautiful paper about living deaf doulas and the sound of the genuine, but also the Catherine Crismell.
I love her. Yeah, she's great.
Do you mind just voicing that for? I'd love to hear it in your voice if you don't mind, and then tell us like why. Maybe close with why story, and it's so important to you clearly, and we forget. I think all of us, even storytellers, forget our story.
Oh yeah, we do. That's why we have to talk to each other. Yeah, Catherine. This was actually, this quote is from a preliminary call we had before the panel. And it's just like hauntingly beautiful. Narrative was before us. Narrative is us. Narrative will be after us. Narrative is the caring. Yeah, I don't even know how you say anything else after that. Yeah, and I think that, when Catherine was talking about this, she was talking about the difference between a story and a narrative. Like, we go to the store, we put on our mask, we go to the store, we get our milk, we go home. And that might be what we tell someone, but like the true narrative is so much more about the thoughts we had before we put on the mask, the tears we might have had on the way to the store, the phone call, the conversations, all the threads of like what's making us human in that moment. If we can make space for all of that, like that is the caring. And that's what she was talking to, and literally I like teared up when she said it the first time, because I was like, okay, Catherine, that's like, I hope this comes up in the panel, because this is it. this is all that, this is what we do. I think this is what we do. I know this is a broad coming into not just talking about myself, but I think this is what we do in our caregiving worlds. Is the modality of narrative is the caring. And we just might have different models of how we participate in that. But at the core root, conversation and communication has been us forever. Before paper, before computers, before social media, it was talking with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my mentors, who's a queer writer, Matthew Stadler. Matthew's work, but extraordinary writer. I asked him once, what makes great writing? Um, this is a person who's won just about every award you can imagine as a writer, etc. Like, I really want to know, like, you're known as a genius level writer. What makes good writing? And he's like, oh, that's easy. It's like, oh, okay, great, that's easy. Let me hear. He says it's people who take care with words.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. When I graduated from college and I got my first newspaper job in a very, very, very rural town in Georgia. And I was called it and it had to be because I would have lost my job. This is before I was fully out too. But there's like a card from the Georgia Press Association that like tells you like what you're aspiring to be as a journalist. And one of those things is about, caring and tending to people well. And I take it very seriously. I think that I've kind of like kept that and woven it into what I do. And I think storytelling is so important because so many of us are silenced. And we're told that, our narratives don't count, that we don't matter. And I think when we make space for just one person to tell their whole narrative without expectation, with space, with their queerness embodied, if we're thinking about it within the realm of that community, then we're participating in Jubilee Year, which I know this is a very theological concept that we do not need to go into or have time. But essentially where everybody has what they need because we're taking care of everybody. And so it's a liberative act. And if that one person gets it, then they might go to this other person and it ripple effects that way. Yeah.
Well, I'm all for Jubilee.
Mm-hmm.
I know. We hope we do. Yeah.
Well, Deanna, anything in closing?
I know being an end-of-life doula makes me a better person because the work that I've had to do when I consciously thought of this path, I know every doula thinks, I thought of this amazing thing, and then we get on the internet and somebody else is doing it. But when I came into me to do it back then, the journey that I've had to go on in that role without the support of a whole hospice team has made me a better person. In order to sit with the dying, you have to look at things so that you can be able to do that without attaching to that situation and really enmeshing with that person. So I love that you're calling part of your work doula. I love that. And yeah, the people out there who are companioning with suffering and companioning, it doesn't have to necessarily be dying, but helping people to transform their wounds is a companion into wholeness.
Yeah.
We have a question. How do we get access to more your words of wisdom, Rachael? And it's Queer and Faith, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go to queerandfaith.com. A lot of the recent writings are like all of my theology essays. So if you think that's been dope, then you'll have a fun time there. But you'll find Living Death Doula there as well. And I want to encourage you, if you've enjoyed this conversation, of course I want you to read my writing, but if you want to read specifically Living Death Doula, there is literally a clickable button at my homepage that says Living Death Doula, and you can watch and see and hear and read the presentation I gave at AAR. And you can see some of these people that we've talked about here, who I love and cherish that I got to spend time with, especially Devin, who is in my core research. Devin is in that presentation work that you can find on my site. And if you're like, oh, I like your ramblings and things, Queer and Faith is my social handle across the universe. So Instagram is just like a very Enneagram for like personal dump and also like conversations. I do a weekly talk on Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with my co-founder of Bible Queery. We talk about literally everything under the sun. It doesn't always stay in the spiritual realm, so come hang out to that. And we like answering people's questions there too. But, yeah.
Beautiful. All right, everybody, you heard it. Queer in Faith, where you find
Thank
Rachael. Thank you for being. I mean,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel honored to spend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
It was a joy. So much fun.
All right. Well, I think until next time, Kaylee's going to take us out with the song is called Slow Walk. And we don't even know who's next, but we'll be back soon. And we'll be having more conversations like that. Thank you, Rachael, for everything you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll see. Maybe there. Oh, there it is.